At the crowded airport gate, a decorated Army colonel faces unexpected resistance. Airline staff dismiss him with arrogance, hiding behind vague fallacies. Passengers watch in disbelief as tension escalates, and the colonel responds with quiet dignity until one powerful line changes everything. "We don't let people like you board on special clearance." The gate agent snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through the hum of the busy terminal. The words hung in the air, like a slap, jolting the crowd around gate C-17 into uneasy silence. Families with children froze. A businessman lowered his phone mid-text. The harsh fluorescent lights above flickered against polished tiles, reflecting the officers' boots that had marched across deserts, jungles, and war zones, boots that now stood still in a line for boarding. Colonel David Carter didn't flinch. His broad shoulders carried the weight of decades of service, but his eyes remained steady, calm. The uniform he wore was pressed, medals gleaming on his chest, like silent witnesses to battles fought and brothers lost. In his hand, he clutched a small leather folder, the military clearance papers authorizing his solemn duty, escorting the remains of a fallen soldier home. "Sir, I have clearance," Carter said evenly, voice low but firm, as if his words carried the discipline of an entire generation. He slid the papers across the counter. The agent didn't even look. She folded her arms, lips twisted with disdain. "Policy. Security concerns. You'll have to wait." A murmur rippled through the waiting passengers. Some leaned forward. Others whispered. Phones lifted, recording. The injustice was too obvious to ignore. Just a few feet away, civilians streamed past unhindered, boarding without delay. Yet here stood a colonel, stopped, questioned, doubted. The symbolism was cruel. A soldier tasked with honoring the dead being dishonored in plain view of his own countrymen. A man in a worn leather jacket, clearly a veteran by the patches on his sleeve, spoke up. "He's military escort. You don't delay an escort. Not ever." His voice shook with outrage. The agent shot him a glare. "Sir, please don't interfere." Carter inhaled deeply, the patience in his chest tested. Memories of deployments. Flash standing at checkpoints in foreign lands where he too had faced suspicion, where men judged him for the uniform on his back. But this was not Kabul, not Fallujah. This was home. The silence cracked when the agent pushed his papers back. Across the counter with a flick of her nails. The folder slid off and landed on the floor with a dull thud. A gasp swept through the terminal. Carter bent slowly, picked it up, brushed it off. The action was simple, but it carried a weight that electrified the room. Camera zoomed in. Fingers typed furiously. Twitter, TikTok, Facebook feeds were already filling with clips and captions. Straightening his frame, Carter locked eyes with the woman. His voice, though quiet, resonated through the gate like a drumbeat. "I buried men for this country who never got to come home," he said. "I will not let you stand in the way of one who finally has." The crowd erupted not in cheers, but in raw sound. Gasps, murmurs, and the sharp intake of breath from witnesses who knew they were watching a line being crossed. The retired Marine stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Ma'am, you're going to regret this." The agent shifted uneasily, but arrogance held her ground. She raised her hand, signaling to security. "If you don't step aside, we'll have to remove you from the terminal." Remove him, an Army colonel, escorting a coffin draped in the flag. The irony scorched the air. Carter didn't move. His stillness was more powerful than 1,000 protests. He stood tall, embodying the very oath he had sworn, to remain steadfast in the face of hostility. Then, from the corner of the gate, a boy's small voice broke the silence. "Mom, why won't they let the soldier go?" Heads turned. The mother tried to hush him, but it was too late. The child's question sliced through excuses and corporate jargon, piercing the heart of everyone watching. Carter's eyes softened, just for a moment. He looked at the boy and gave the faintest nod, a silent promise that dignity would not be stolen here. The Marine moved closer, his phone camera raised high. "Colonel, say the word. America's watching." Carter glanced at the rows of glowing screens, the dozens of witnesses capturing every second. For the first time, the agent's mask cracked. She glanced nervously at her colleagues, at the spreading sea of phones. But Carter didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply leaned forward, his words sharp and final. "This uniform doesn't need your permission." The gate doors buzzed as another group of passengers strolled through without issue. And just as Carter straightened to take a step, two security officers in dark suits began walking toward him, faces stern, radios crackling. The chapter closed. Not on resolution, but on a cliffhanger. The colonel's path blocked, yet his dignity unbroken. The air itself seemed to whisper a truth that no policy could erase. This was not just about a boarding pass. It was about respect, Colonel Carter. One of the officers said flatly, though the nameplate on his chest made it clear he already knew exactly who he was. "You need to step aside." The terminal fell quiet again. The sound of rolling suitcases and boarding announcements from neighboring gates faded into a tense hush. Every eye locked onto the scene unfolding. Two uniformed airline security officers squaring off against a U.S. Army colonel. Carter remained still. His hands, steady and deliberate, held the folder of clearance papers like a shield of truth. His silence was not weakness. It was defiance wrapped in discipline. "I have orders," Carter replied, voice low but unmistakably firm. "This, soldiers, remains are entrusted to me. You will not obstruct that duty." One officer, younger and clearly nervous, shifted uneasily. His partner, older, hardened, barked back. "Sir, we don't make exceptions. You've been flagged. Step away from the gate." Flagged. The word hung like smoke, poisonous and vague. What did it even mean? Who flagged him? Why? The passengers? Whispers grew louder, angry now, frustrated by the transparent injustice. A woman in business attire raised her phone high. "He's an Army colonel escorting a coffin. Do your jobs and let him through." "Yeah," another man shouted. "Why are civilians boarding while you stop him?" The security officer's face flushed. He wasn't used to being challenged. "Everyone calm down," he barked, though the crowd was anything but calm. Phones glowed like fireflies in the dim terminal light, recording from every angle. Carter adjusted his stance, posture impeccable, voice sharp as a blade. "When I stood guard in Baghdad, I didn't ask civilians for their permission to keep them safe. Don't ask me to beg for mine now." The words landed with a weight heavier than any uniformed command. Murmurs turned into shouts. "Let him through. Show some respect. This is shameful." The retired Marine from earlier stepped forward, shoulders squared. "Colonel, you want me to speak for you? Because I will." Carter shook his head once firmly. "No, Marine. My voice is enough." The lead security officer's jaw tightened. He motioned to his radio. "Call for backup." That was the breaking point. The crowd erupted. People shouted over each other, recording, demanding names, demanding accountability. A teenage girl live-streamed the confrontation, her voice trembling. With fury as she narrated, "They're blocking a soldier from escorting his brother home. Look at this, look at this." The airline staff behind the counter looked rattled now, shuffling papers pointlessly, whispering to each other. The gate agent who started it all stood stiff, arms crossed, but her eyes darted nervously between the colonel and the sea of phones pointed her way. Carter's calmness cut through the chaos. He leaned in just enough for the security officers to hear. "If you think I'll move, You don't understand the meaning of duty." The younger officer hesitated. His grip on his radio slackened. His eyes flickered toward Carter's medals, then to the crowd, then back again. He swallowed. Hard. For a brief second, respect cracked through the surface of protocol. But the older officer pressed forward, his voice louder, more forceful. "Final warning, Colonel. Move or we'll escort you out." Carter's reply was simple. "Escort me, then. But you'll do it in front of all of them." He gestured subtly toward the audience of witnesses, their cameras trained, their voices rising. The crowd roared in support. Someone shouted, "Try it and see what happens." Others clapped, stomping feet, building momentum like a drumline. Of defiance. The tension was unbearable, the kind that makes the air feel thick, unbreathable. The two officers glanced at each other. Neither moved. Neither wanted to be the one to lay a hand on a decorated colonel while the world watched. Then came a sound that shifted everything. The ping of dozens of phones receiving the same notification at once. Twitter posts, TikTok clips, Facebook shares, the video was already spreading. Some passengers gasped as they scrolled. "It's trending," someone whispered. "He's already viral." Carter stood taller, his voice steady, carrying across the terminal like a command. "I will not dishonor the dead to satisfy your false authority. Stand down." The younger officer stepped back, uncertainty written all over his face. The older one clenched his jaw but didn't move forward. The balance of power was shifting not with force, but with dignity and witness. From the crowd, the Marine spoke. Again, quieter this time, but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Colonel, you're not alone." The words rippled outward. Strangers nodded. Some placed hands over hearts. A few saluted. The gate agent's voice trembled as she tried to regain control. "That this isn't over. The airline will decide." Carter's eyes met hers, unwavering. "You're right. It isn't over. But the decision is no longer yours." The chapter ended with the sight of passengers refusing to move, forming a wall of witnesses behind Carter. The gate was no longer just a checkpoint. It had become a battlefield of dignity. "Check this out, it's already at 50,000 views," a teenager whispered, eyes glued to her phone screen. She spun around, showing her friends the shaky video of Colonel Carter standing tall at gate C-17. Defying the airline staff and security. In the background, the clip captured the boy's innocent voice. "Mom, why won't they let the soldier go?" That one line struck like lightning across the internet. It wasn't just footage, it was a story, a symbol of everything people feared was being lost. Respect, honor, decency. Within minutes, hashtags exploded. Hashtag let the soldier board. Hashtag respect our heroes. Hashtag airline disgrace. Carter himself didn't touch a phone. He stood where he was, unbending, a silent pillar amid the storm. His focus wasn't likes or retweets. It was the flag-draped coffin waiting in the cargo hold, a young man's final journey. But around him, the crowd had become an army of witnesses. Dozens live-streamed. Hundreds commented. Thousands watched in real time. The retired Marine, his voice hoarse but strong, kept repeating to anyone who would listen, "This isn't just about him, it's about every man and woman who ever wore the uniform." Meanwhile, in a sleek office tower miles away, the airline's corporate team was already scrambling. Screens lit up with graphs, notifications, angry emails pouring in by the second. A young PR manager's voice shook as she spoke into a headset. "It's everywhere, sir. Every major platform. It's spreading faster than we can respond." The executive on the other end, voice cold and impatient, growled, "Contain it. Issue a statement. Blame security protocols." "But sir," she hesitated, "the videos clearly show other passengers being let through. Only the colonel was stopped." Silence. Then the executive's voice, lower now. Damage control. Do whatever it takes? Back at gate C-17, the air was charged. People weren't just recording, they were confronting. This is racism, plain and simple, a woman declared. If he looked different, you'd have waved him through. Others echoed her, voices sharp, cutting through the sterile announcements of departing flights. Shame! Respect the soldier! This is America! The gate agent who started it all shrank under the attention, her once arrogant stance unraveling. Sweat beaded at her temple. Every word she spoke seemed hollow now, drowned out by the roar of public outrage echoing from screens both inside and outside the terminal. Carter, unshaken, finally spoke again. His voice was calm, but it carried, "This isn't about me. It's about him." He pointed toward the cargo bay doors where the coffin lay unseen but not forgotten. He gave everything for this country, and you would deny him his last honor. The words burned into every recording, every stream, every post-dot. By the time they hit Twitter, captions lit up the internet. Airline dishonors fallen hero. Colonel refused entry while escorting coffin. This is not who we are. Across the nation, veterans riposted, celebrities weighed in, news anchors scrambled. The clips played on cable channels within the hour, anchors shaking their heads in disbelief. Inside the terminal, strangers began to act. A woman draped a small American flag over her shoulders. A man in a suit removed his hat, holding it to his chest. Even children sensed the weight of the moment, tugging at their parents, asking questions about soldiers and respect. The gate agent whispered to a colleague, panic etched across her face. "Why isn't corporate calling back?" The colleague shook his head, equally pale. "Because they can't stop it now." Carter's silence grew louder than any outburst could have. His composure was unbreakable, and it only fueled the crowd's fury. Every second the airline delayed, the scandal deepened. Somewhere above them, the intercom crackled to life. A nervous voice announced, "Attention passengers at gate C-17. Boarding will be delayed due to procedural review." Boos erupted. People shouted, drowning out the announcement. "Lies! Respect the soldier! Let him through!" The Marine raised his fist high, his voice booming. "We're not moving until the colonel boards." The crowd cheered, stomping their feet in unison, the terminal floor vibrating with defiance. For a moment, it felt less like an airport and more like a rally, a stand against injustice happening in real time. Carter glanced at the Marine, then at the sea of strangers behind him. For the first time, his expression softened not in weakness, but in gratitude. He had not asked for their support, but it had arrived, uncheckable, undeniable. And while he stood grounded in dignity, somewhere beyond those walls, the airline's reputation was already unraveling. News vans were being dispatched. Editorials were being drafted. Military officials were being briefed. The gate had become a stage, and the whole nation was watching. But the true storm was only beginning. In a quiet Pentagon office, the glow of a television reflected off a polished oak table. The news ticker scrolled beneath shaky footage from gate C-17. Airline blocks. Colonel escorting fallen soldier, passengers outraged. General Raymond Harris, a man who had buried more comrades than he cared to count, leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "That's Carter," he muttered. His aide glanced at him, unsure if it was a question or a statement. "Yes, sir," the aide replied. "Colonel David Carter. Escort detail for Sergeant Michael Alvarez. His transport was cleared. He's being stopped at the airport." General Harris slammed his palm against the table, the sound echoing across the room. Stopped? For what? This man served 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and now he's dishonored on American soil? The aide hesitated. The airline cites security concerns. The general's laugh was bitter, hollow. Security concerns? That man is security. He snatched the phone from the desk, dialing with the authority of a man who had moved armies. Back. At gate C-17, Carter remained motionless. His stillness was a command in itself, a silent refusal to be broken. Around him, the crowd grew larger, spilling into neighboring gates, their voices a mix of anger and resolve. A woman approached him, middle-aged, her hands trembling as she held a folded flag against her chest. "My son," she whispered, tears brimming. "He was Army too. Thank you for standing for him." Carter inclined his head gently. "Ma'am, it's my honor." Her words were picked up by another live stream, spreading like fire across the internet. The narrative was no longer just about one colonel, it was about every soldier who had ever been denied dignity. The gate agent tried again to assert control, her voice brittle. "Ladies and gentlemen, please disperse. This disruption is—" She was drowned out instantly. The Marine barked, "The only disruption here is you." Cheers followed, clapping, chants of "Respect our heroes." Then came the sound that shifted the atmosphere, Carter's phone vibrating in his pocket. He reached for it, glancing at the caller ID, his spine straightened slightly. He answered. "Colonel Carter," a voice thundered through the receiver, firm, commanding, yet threaded with respect. "This is General Harris. I've been briefed. Stand your ground. You move when I say you move." "Yes, sir," Carter replied. Calm as stone. The crowd didn't hear the voice on the other end, but they sensed the gravity of the moment. Carter's composure sharpened. His presence seemed even more immovable. General Harris's voice continued, lower now. "You're not alone. The Department of Defense is already contacting the airline's executive board. They'll feel this in every corner of their business." "Understood, sir," Carter said. "Hold the line, David. America is watching." Click. The call ended, but the effect lingered. Carter slid the phone back into his pocket. For the first time, a flicker of relief crossed his features, not for himself, but for the soldier he escorted. His duty was no longer his alone. It was shared, amplified, enforced by the highest ranks of command. Meanwhile, corporate headquarters of the airline was in chaos. Board members barked at each other over speakerphones. The CEO, pale and sweating, rubbed his temples as reports poured in. "Military command is on the line," his assistant stammered. "Tell them I'm in a meeting," the CEO muttered. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's not a request." The room fell into stunned silence. Back in the terminal, the tension grew unbearable. The gate agent fumbled with her earpiece, listening to some frantic voice from above. Her posture sagged. Her earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by something far smaller fear. But still, she tried one last time. "Colonel Carter? If you just step aside, we can resolve." This quietly. Carter turned, his voice quiet but carrying across the crowd. Quiet isn't justice. Silence isn't honor. The Marine at his side roared approval, the crowd echoing in waves. The terminal thundered with unity. And then, like a tide turning, airport police arrived not to remove Carter, but to form a perimeter. Confusion spread until a captain stepped forward, saluting Carter in front of everyone. "Sir," the officer said, loud enough for the entire crowd to hear, "you're not going anywhere without honor. Orders from above." The crowd erupted, cheers echoing off every wall. For the first time, Carter allowed himself the smallest smile, brief but sharp as a blade. The airline had wanted to make him invisible. Instead, they had made him unforgettable. In the 35th floor of the airline's glass tower headquarters, chaos ruled. Screens flashed breaking news banners, Twitter feeds, and a cascade of emails from outraged customers. Executives in Tailored suits crowded around a polished mahogany table, their voices overlapping in panicked bursts. Stocks already dipping 3%, one barked. Veterans groups are calling for boycotts, another added. We need a statement fast. The CEO, Richard Langston, sat at the head of the table, his jaw tight, his eyes bloodshot. He had built his career on projecting control, but tonight, every shred of authority slipped through his fingers. What's the current messaging? He snapped. A young PR manager, pale and trembling, pushed her glasses up. We released a statement citing standard security procedures. And? She swallowed. It made things worse. They're calling it a lie. Hashtags are multiplying. The footage shows civilians boarding without issue while Colonel Carter was stopped. Langston cursed under his breath. Pull it down. Draft another. Something respectful, patriotic. Emphasize our commitment to the military. But, sir, she said hesitantly, the comments are already calling us hypocrites. They're saying, I don't care what they're saying, he roared, slamming his fist against the table. The sound echoed in the room, but it only underscored his desperation. Meanwhile, at gate C-17, Carter remained unmoved. His posture straight, his eyes steady, he was the eye of the storm. The crowd had grown into the hundreds now. Reporters with microphones pushed through, cameras flashing. The Marine kept close, acting like an unofficial guard. Colonel, you have a message for the public? A journalist shouted. Carter shook his head. This isn't about messages. It's about respect. His words, short and piercing, rippled across live broadcasts, replayed in clips within minutes. They contrasted sharply with the airline's hollow, stumbling statements. Back at headquarters, Langston's phone buzzed relentlessly. A board member's voice snarled through the line. Richard, this is a disaster. Military brass are calling. Senators are tweeting. Our largest shareholder wants answers. Langston pinched the bridge of his nose, sweat forming at his temples. I'll handle it. No, the voice shot back. You've already lost control. The call ended abruptly, leaving Langston staring at the deadline, fury boiling. In the boardroom, another executive spoke cautiously. We could apologize. Langston's head snapped toward him, eyes blazing. Apologize? Do you realize what that means legally? We'd be admitting fault. We'll drown in lawsuits. The PR manager's voice was almost a whisper. Sir, with respect, the lawsuits are already coming. It's public opinion we can't survive. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Meanwhile, on live television, a panel of commentators debated furiously. A retired general, his face lined with age and sorrow, spoke with quiet authority. When you dishonor one soldier, you dishonor them all. The airline owes more than an apology, it owes its soul. That clip alone gathered millions of views in under an hour. Inside the terminal, chants grew louder. Let him board. Let him board. The atmosphere felt less like an airport and more like a protest ground. Security stood back, unwilling to intervene. They knew now that any wrong move would ignite an even greater blaze. Carter, calm as ever, glanced at the crowd, then at the coffin beyond the gate doors. In his chest, his heart ached not for himself, but for the fallen soldier, whose journey home was being marred by arrogance and incompetence. He whispered under his breath, almost like a prayer, "You'll get home, son." "I promise." The Marine beside him leaned closer. "Colonel, you've got the whole country on your side. They can't touch you now." Carter didn't answer. His silence was his shield, his dignity his weapon. Back in the boardroom, Langston finally spoke, his voice bitter, almost broken. "Fine, draft an apology, but make it look calculated. We admit nothing. We control the narrative. But even as he said it, his phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a shareholder. It was the Secretary of Defense. Langston's face drained. Of color. The room fell silent. Every executive stared, waiting. Slowly, reluctantly, he answered. "Mr. Langston." The voice on the other end said, icy and commanding, "You've just made an enemy you cannot afford. Fix this, immediately." Langston's hands trembled. For the first time, the mask of power slipped. He realized the truth too late. This wasn't just a PR crisis. It was a national reckoning. The footage from Gate C-17 wasn't just trending. Anymore, it was everywhere. By morning, every major network opened with the same headline: "Colonel blocked from escorting fallen soldier." Clips rolled on repeat. Carter standing tall, the boy asking why, the Marine shouting in protest. In diners, barbershops, offices, and classrooms, the conversation was the same. At a small-town cafe in Texas, an old veteran pounded his fist against the table. "I buried brothers overseas. And this is how they treat one of ours? Shameful." In a New York newsroom, anchors debated the airline's actions. One commentator, voice sharp, said, "This isn't just a mistake, it's systemic. Would this have happened if he were white? Or wearing a suit instead of a uniform?" The question lingered, uncomfortable, undeniable. Social media burned hotter. Veterans groups flooded timelines with messages of solidarity. Hashtags like #HonorTheFallen and #StandWithCarter trended alongside. Fiery memes showing the airline's logo crossed out with bold red lines. Even politicians weighed in. A congresswoman tweeted, "Colonel Carter embodies the very values we claim to honor." The airline owes him, the family of Sergeant Alvarez, and the entire nation an apology. But not everyone agreed. A few voices defended the airline, hiding behind policy and procedure. Yet their words were drowned in the tidal wave of outrage. At the heart of it all, Carter still stood at the gate. Hours had passed. His uniform bore the faint wrinkles of waiting, but his posture never faltered. The Marine remained by his side, fielding questions from journalists, shielding Carter from the worst of the crowd's frenzy. A reporter leaned in, microphone outstretched. "Colonel, the nation is behind you. Do you have a message for America?" Carter looked past her, toward the tarmac where the coffin waited. His answer was simple. "This isn't about me. It's about him, about all of them." The clip struck. Like thunder, spreading across screens within minutes. The soldier's dignity pierced louder than outrage. In homes across America, families fell silent watching him. A father told his son, "That's what honor looks like." A teacher paused, her lesson to show the class. A group of soldiers watching from their base stood and saluted the screen. Meanwhile, at the airline's headquarters, panic turned into desperation. The apology drafted hours earlier had only poured gasoline on the fire. Veterans groups have announced protests at our major hubs. A marketing executive groaned, clutching her head. "Our stock dropped 10% in one day," another reported. "We're being called un-American." Langston sat slumped, his tie loosened, his face gray. For once, the man who thrived on control had nothing left to grasp. Every strategy crumbled against the tidal wave of truth. The Secretary of Defense issued a statement live on television. "We stand with Colonel Carter. Every soldier deserves dignity, in life and in death. We will not tolerate disrespect." It wasn't just a rebuke, it was a warning. At the airport, the chants grew louder. Strangers linked arms, forming a line behind Carter, a living shield of solidarity. Some cried quietly. Others shouted until their voices cracked. The Marine raised his fist again, and the crowd echoed him like thunder. Carter finally closed his eyes for a moment, not in defeat, but in prayer. He thought of Sergeant Alvarez, 23 years old, gone too soon. He thought of the promise he had made to the young man's mother. I'll bring him home. Nothing, no arrogance, no policy, no gate would break that promise. Far above. The chaos, in boardrooms and newsrooms alike, the nation's soul was being tested. And everywhere people looked, they saw the same image, a black colonel, calm and resolute, standing against injustice not with rage, but with dignity. By nightfall, polls showed trust in the airline plummeting. Calls for boycotts reached millions. Veterans lined up to cancel credit cards linked to the company's rewards program. Shareholders demanded Langston's resignation, but none of it mattered to Carter. He hadn't moved. Not an inch. His mission remained the same, to honor the fallen, and as the terminal echoed with chants and prayers, it became clear this was no longer just an airport dispute. It was a national reckoning. By the 7th hour, the air inside the terminal felt electric. Every whisper, every footstep carried weight. Camera lenses never stopped flashing. Phones stayed raised like sentries, capturing every moment. Colonel Carter remained still at the gate. The coffin still waited. The crowd still held their ground. But upstairs, in a glass-walled conference room, desperation brewed. Langston's voice cracked with frustration. We need him out of that terminal. He's making us look powerless. The regional security chief, a stout man with a badge hanging around his neck, shifted uncomfortably. With respect, sir, this is different. The man's an officer. A decorated one. You saw the reaction. I don't care if he's Eisenhower. Langston snapped. If we don't act, this company collapses. He slammed his palm on the table. Send security. The room fell silent. Even his most loyal executives hesitated. But money and power had driven Langston his whole life. He couldn't see beyond them. Minutes later, 3 security officers approached the gate, their navy jackets marked with the airline's crest. The crowd noticed immediately. Phones shot upward. A hush fell, thick as smoke. The Marine stepped forward, placing himself between Carter and the approaching guards. Don't even think about it, he growled, his jaw set like stone. One of? The guards lifted his hands. We're just here to escort. Escort? The Marine cut in. You lay one finger on him, and you'll answer to every veteran in this country. Carter raised his hand calmly. Stand down. His voice carried authority, steady and controlled. He turned to the guards. Gentlemen, you know who I am. You know why I'm here. Do you really want to be the ones who stop me from honoring a fallen soldier? The guards exchanged glances. Sweat beaded on their brows. Around them, the crowd began chanting louder, voices rising like a storm. Let him through. Let him through. One guard muttered, We shouldn't be doing this. But his radio crackled. Proceed. They stepped forward anyway. The Marine squared his shoulders. But before the situation could explode, something unexpected happened. A little girl broke from her mother's side. She walked straight up to Carter, tugged on his sleeve, and held out a tiny American flag she'd been waving. Her voice trembled but carried through the silence. Please, mister, take him home. The terminal froze. Carter bent down slowly, accepting the flag with gentle hands. His eyes glistened, but his posture never broke. He tucked the flag into his uniform pocket over his heart. The crowd erupted not in chaos, but in a tidal wave of cheers, applause, and chants. The guards stopped cold, unable to move forward. The Marine, tears streaming down his face, saluted Carter once more. Cameras caught every second. Within minutes, the image of Carter kneeling before a child, taking the flag, went viral. Anchors called it the moment that broke the airline. Langston watched from the control room, his face ashen. He hadn't anticipated this. He thought force would end the standoff. Instead, it turned Carter into a living symbol of honor and turned the airline into the villain of the century. Back at the gate, the guards retreated quietly, defeated not by fists, but by the sheer weight of truth. The people had chosen their side. And it wasn't the airlines. The Marine leaned in close to Carter. "Sir, I don't know how this ends, but I know one thing: history's watching." Carter nodded, staring at the coffin waiting on the tarmac. "Then let's make sure it sees the right side of it." As the chants thundered louder, Langston's empire began to crumble in real time. Stockholders called for emergency meetings. Lawmakers announced hearings. And for the first time in decades, a corporation was forced to face something money couldn't buy its way out of. Accountability. The breaking point had arrived. Not just for the airline, but for the nation. By dawn the next day, the terminal looked like a war zone of cameras, microphones, and news crews. What had begun as a single denied flight had transformed into the most watched standoff in the country. Every news ticker screamed with the same headline: "Airline blocks decorated. Officer from escorting soldier's body." Commentators replayed the footage of Carter kneeling to accept the flag from the little girl, calling it the image that broke corporate America. In the corporate tower downtown, Langston's world was collapsing. Calls from shareholders poured in, their voices frantic and angry. "This isn't a story anymore. It's a movement." One shouted over the phone, "Our stock dropped 8 points overnight. You've destroyed billions." Langston slammed his fist on the desk. "It's a temporary storm. Public memory is short." But even as he said it, screens around the room showed a different truth. Senators demanding hearings, veterans organizing marches, celebrities joining the chant online. "Let him through." One executive, pale and trembling, spoke up. "Sir, there are boycotts being announced across the country. Whole unions are refusing to work our flights." Langston's face drained of color. For the first time, he understood that this wasn't just a PR crisis. It was survival. Meanwhile, back at the terminal, Carter had not moved. The coffin was still waiting, silent and heavy with the weight of unfinished duty. His uniform was wrinkled now, but his posture remained perfect, as if carved from stone. The Marine beside him whispered, "Sir, you've got the whole country behind you." Carter's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "Then the country needs to see that some things cannot be bought. Not dignity, not honor, not this soldier's journey home." A flight attendant, trembling, approached him. She looked torn between fear and reverence. "Colonel, I just wanted you to know. My father was in Fallujah. He would have been proud of you." Her words cracked something in the crowd. More employees stepped forward: pilots, attendants, baggage handlers. One by one, they placed their hands over their hearts and turned toward Carter. The cameras captured it all. Viewers around the world saw employees of the very airline that had tried to silence him now standing with him. Langston, watching helplessly. On live feeds, exploded. Their employees? Fire them all. But his advisors no longer obeyed. One finally snapped, his voice sharp. "Sir, this is bigger than you, bigger than us. You can't fire a nation." Langston's jaw clenched. For the first time in decades, he looked small, powerless, almost pitiful. Back in the terminal, Carter finally spoke, not to the crowd, not to the cameras, but to the soldier whose coffin still lay waiting. His voice was soft, but the microphones caught every word. "You're not forgotten. I'll see this through." The silence that followed was heavier than any chant. The crowd wept openly. Even hardened reporters lowered their cameras. The airline's official spokesperson tried to issue a statement that morning, reading from shaky notes at a press conference. We regret the misunderstanding." But before he could finish, journalists erupted with questions. Why deny a decorated officer? Why lie about company policy? Who authorized the removal order? The man stammered, unable to answer. Within minutes, clips of his fumbling response went viral under the hashtag. Hashtag the reckoning. Politicians weighed in next. The president himself released a statement honoring Carter and condemning the airline's actions. Federal investigations were announced. The stock plummeted again. For Carter, none of this mattered. He wasn't thinking about politics or money. He was thinking about a promise to never leave a fallen comrade behind. The crowd's chant rose again, louder, clearer, shaking the glass walls of the terminal. Let him through. Let him through. Langston's empire was crumbling in real time. He tried to make calls, tried to cut deals, but doors slammed shut everywhere he turned. No one wanted to stand beside him anymore. And still, Carter waited, silent, unmoving, unbreakable. The reckoning had begun not just for one man, not just for one company, but for every institution that believed dignity could be denied and honor could be silenced. And the world was watching. The airport terminal had grown eerily quiet, as if the whole building held its breath. For hours now, Carter had remained beside the coffin, unmoving, the embodiment of patience and resolve. The crowd around him swelled, yet no one dared disturb the stillness he commanded. And then came the sound of polished shoes striking tile sharp. Arrogant, unhurried, Langston, flanked by two security chiefs and trailed by nervous aides, the CEO cut through the crowd like a storm. He wore a tailored suit, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. The cameras whirred, zooming in on his every step. The Marine muttered, "Well, look who finally crawled out of his tower." Langston stopped just short of Carter, his lips curving in. A tight smile that never touched his eyes. Colonel Carter. "I believe this circus has gone on long enough." Carter didn't rise. He didn't even look at the man. Instead, his gaze stayed fixed on the coffin. This soldier goes home. That's all that matters. Langston crouched slightly, lowering his voice but ensuring the microphones could still catch him. "You've humiliated this company, Colonel. You've destroyed our stock, our reputation. Do you think your little stunt makes you a hero?" Carter's silence was more powerful than any argument. Langston leaned closer, his words venomous. "You're just one man, one soldier. This is my world. You'll obey my rules." Finally, Carter looked up. His eyes, calm and steady, locked with Langston's. "No, this isn't your world. It belongs to the men and women who bled for it, who carried its flag, who gave everything so you could sit in that suit." The crowd erupted in applause, their voices echoing like thunder. The chant began again, "Let him through, let him through." Langston's face flushed crimson. He raised his hands, shouting over the noise. "This is trespassing. You're disrupting flights, blocking operations. I could have you arrested." The Marine at Carter's side stepped forward, chest out. "Try it, and watch how fast this country tears you apart." Langston faltered. For the first time, he realized he wasn't just facing a soldier, he was facing the weight of a nation. In desperation, he turned to the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is nothing but a misunderstanding." But the words died in his throat. Behind him, a group of airline employees, pilots in crisp uniforms, attendants in blue scarves, mechanics with grease on their hands stepped forward. They formed a line behind Carter, shoulders squared, eyes fierce. One pilot spoke, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "We fly for him, not for you." The terminal shook with cheers. Langston stumbled back a step, his carefully built authority crumbling. Carter rose to his feet at last, tall and unyielding. "Mr. Langston," he said evenly, "you may control planes, but you will never control. Honor, not here, not today." The moment hung suspended in the air. Cameras captured it from every angle. The colonel, upright and immovable, and the CEO, small and cornered, his empire collapsing around him. Langston tried to retort, but his voice cracked, his composure shattered. The aides who had trailed him moments earlier now avoided his gaze. Even his own security shifted uneasily, unwilling to enforce his orders. The chant thundered again, drowning out the last fragments of his power. Let him through. Let him through. And in that instant, Langston understood the truth he had already lost. Not just the fight, not just the company, but the one thing no wealth or power could ever buy: respect. He turned sharply, storming away through the crowd. But the cameras followed him, catching every detail of his retreat. His last stand had not been victory, it was humiliation. Carter, meanwhile, turned back to the coffin. He lowered his hand gently to the flag, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We go home together, soldier. No one will stop us." The Marine saluted. The employees behind Carter saluted. The crowd saluted. And across the nation, millions watching from their living rooms did the same. Langston's empire had fallen. Carter's stand had prevailed. But the journey was not yet complete. The soldier still had to go home. The engines of the transport plane roared softly as it touched down on the small town runway. Beyond the fences, thousands had gathered: neighbors, veterans, schoolchildren holding flags, and families who had waited for hours just to pay their respects. The coffin, draped in the American flag, was carried carefully down the ramp. Colonel David Carter walked beside it, his uniform crisp, his steps measured. The crowd stood in silence, the only sound the rustle of flags in the wind. At the bottom of the ramp, the fallen soldier's family waited. A mother whose face bore both strength and sorrow. A father who stood rigidly, fists trembling, as if trying to stay composed. And a younger sister clutching a folded piece of paper, a letter her brother had sent from overseas. Carter approached them, saluting first before kneeling slightly to speak. His voice, steady yet tender, carried across the hushed crowd. "Your son served with honor. He was brave, selfless, and he gave everything for the country he loved. It is my privilege to bring him home." The mother's tears fell freely as she touched the coffin, whispering her son's name. The father clasped Carter's hand tightly, unable to speak. And the sister, her voice barely a whisper, said, "Thank you for not leaving him alone." Carter's throat tightened, but he nodded. "Never. Not while I still breathe." The coffin was placed gently on a horse-drawn caisson draped in flowers from the community. As it moved slowly through the streets, the entire town lined the sidewalks. Businesses closed. Cars pulled over, drivers standing silently with hands over hearts. Veterans saluted, tears running down weathered cheeks. The funeral service was simple, yet powerful. A bugler played taps, the mournful notes echoing across the hills. Soldiers folded the flag with precision, handing it to the grieving parents. Carter stood at attention the entire time, his eyes forward, his heart heavy but resolute. Across the country, the moment was broadcast live. Millions watched from their homes. Newscasters spoke not of scandal anymore, but of sacrifice, unity, and the power of honor. Meanwhile, the airline reeled from the aftermath. Stock prices had plummeted, lawsuits mounted. Langston had resigned under pressure, his once proud empire in shambles. The company issued apologies, but for many, it was too late. Some mistakes cannot be undone, but Carter didn't care for their downfall. His focus was only on the family before him, on the soldier now laid to rest in the soil of his homeland. After the service, as the sun dipped low, the Marine who had stood by Carter throughout the ordeal approached him. "You did it, Colonel. You brought him home." Carter shook his head. "No, we did." Every voice, every hand that stood up against injustice That's what carried him here." The Marine smiled, tears glistening. "Maybe that's the lesson." "Huh, that one soldier's honor can wake a whole nation." Carter looked out at the horizon, the flag rippling gently in the evening breeze. "Honor doesn't belong to one man," he said quietly. "It belongs to all of us. We just have to choose it." The camera crews, still rolling, captured those words. By the next morning, they were headlines, quoted in newspapers, and etched into memory. For the family, it was not justice they sought, but dignity, and Carter had ensured their son received it. For the nation, it was a reminder of what still mattered when titles, money, and power faded. The soldier was finally home, and Colonel David Carter, though weary and heavy with grief, walked away knowing he had kept his promise. Honor had prevailed.